Today we're going to talk about the differences between living in Oregon versus living in California. Just a quick background to let you guys know where I'm coming from, and then we'll just jump into it. I moved to California in 2012, and I lived in California for 3 years, both in Northern California and in Southern California. I moved to Oregon. I lived in Oregon for a few years, and then I moved back to California. Um, That's not to say that California is better than Oregon. That's just how things go sometimes. So without further ado, we're going to go over the 5 things I like about Oregon over California and the 5 things I like about California over Oregon. And hopefully we can come to a conclusion which state is best for you. So let's first start out with Oregon. So the first and foremost, and probably the best, is just the beauty of Oregon, the outdoors, all the outdoor activities that you can do in terms of if you like lakes, if you like hiking or camping or fishing or hunting. There's tons of stuff to do outside. The air quality is second to none, and it's just beautiful. Like as soon as you drive up to California and you leave California and you drive into Oregon, it just becomes a forest of pine trees, and you just sort of take the 5 all the way through this, winding through this giant forest that is Western Oregon. So just a beauty. You can't beat it. Second, the cost of living. Most places in Oregon are actually really affordable. Now you could go to Portland and find a place that's pretty expensive. I'm sure if you looked around and you weren't like, I want to be in downtown Portland, but you want to be somewhere else. But really, outside of Portland, it's pretty affordable. Now, you do have to understand that you might take a pay cut moving to Oregon because they're not going to pay you as much because the cost of living is less. I know that when I moved from Oregon to California, my pay went up 50%, but so did my costs. So you have to take that into consideration. But all things said and done, it is much, much cheaper to live in Oregon. And I will say, as an aside, food. Food costs more in Oregon. I've seen some stuff online where it actually said the cost of food is higher in California, and that's just not the case from what I found out, because a lot of the produce, although it can be grown locally, for some reason farmers charge more, and maybe that's just because there's less competition. But I know that here in California, the farmers markets are like dirt cheap, $1, $2 for a bunch of kale. You go up to Oregon, and you're going to spend $5 for a little basket of strawberries, where in LA, you'll spend $5 for 3 baskets of strawberries. The food just costs a little bit more there. The pace of life. Pace of life is awesome in Oregon. It's super, super laid back, at least from the places I've been. Eugene was super laid back. I don't know if it's just the weather. People are just like hanging out and used to the rain, and so they're just don't get uptight about much, but super laid back. People drive slower. Like nobody in the whole state drives faster than 55. And there's hippies everywhere. I don't mind it really. When I first went to Oregon, I was like, wow, the 70s didn't die. They just moved to Oregon. So the pace of life is super chill there, especially coming from the East Coast. It's removed from the rest of the U.S. Now that's a good thing and a bad thing. When you're up there, you're sort of by yourself. You don't have the culture in terms of diversity. Ethnic diversity isn't there, so it's really just sort of its own kind of thing. Oregonians don't like when Californians move up there, and it's really just kind of doing its thing up in the upper left of the U.S., and that's kind of cool. You don't have a lot of people necessarily driving through Oregon the way you might through like other states. Certainly, there's just a ton more people in California, much, much fewer people in Oregon, so it's just sort of removed in kind of just its own little unique pocket. Politics. Depending on where you fall on the political spectrum, I liked more conservative in some regards. It's definitely more progressive in certain places in terms of like environmental um, responsibility and building practices. Um, but in terms of like politics, it's definitely a little bit more laid back. There are a lot of like services and stuff for homeless people. Gun rights are like non-existent there, um, and that's what I'm used to from being from Pennsylvania. Uh, so again, it depends on where you are. The bigger the city you're in, the more Democratic it's going to be. But certainly, if you go to the eastern part of the state, it's way more Republican. Um, so let's go on to Cali. So Cali, the weather. Oregon's beautiful, but the weather in California, you can't beat anywhere. There's nowhere in the country that has better weather than California. It just doesn't happen. There's no humidity. There's very few bugs from my experience. Um, Warm winters. Depending on where you are in the state, you can have really hot summers. Or if you're closer to the ocean, it'll be much, much cooler. Um, but the winters are fantastic. You can grow food year round here. Um, just as Oregon is beautiful, the weather in California is amazing. Um, you just have to watch out for the hot summers. The cost of food, farmers markets. The cost of food is much cheaper here because we grow like half of the country's produce. So farmers markets are everywhere. They're plentiful. Every day of the week you can find a farmers market. The cost of food is much less. Um, Cost of living. While the cost of living is much cheaper in Oregon, it can be a lot higher in California. Again, depending on where you live. If you live in places that have crappier weather, hotter weather, like if you're in Sacramento, you're in Chico, anywhere along that sort of central valley that runs throughout the whole state, the cost of living is going to be cheaper because the summers are hotter. The closer you get to the ocean, the more mild the summers are, um, the more expensive it's going to be. Especially like if you're looking at Santa Monica or Venice Beach, it's going to be much more expensive there. San Francisco, ridiculously expensive. The North Bay, Marin County, very, very expensive. But if you're willing, if you're in college and you're willing to have a couple roommates and you don't really care too much about where you live, you can make it work. When I was in LA, I was paying $300 a month for rent because I split a house with 5 people. Um, but if you're living by yourself, it's going to be more expensive, especially in places that have better weather. Again, they pay better, much, much better here in California than in Oregon, so that offsets the cost of living. But at the end of the day, you're making a ton of money and you're not really taking a lot of that home because it's just going out the window. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But at the end of the day, you have nice weather. Um, Beaches. I mean, even though Oregon has great outdoor stuff, and no matter where you go in Oregon, it's going to be beautiful. Um, a lot of places in California, again, where it's cheaper to live, it's going to be hotter. There's not really going to be as much to do outdoors. It's going to be flatter, much, much flatter in the central part of the state. If they have the beaches, again, more expensive, but if you want to drive to the beach, beaches are hands down the best in the country. And the Sierras, you have these high Sierras that run all the way from, Yosemite all the way down to Mount Whitney. And they're awesome if you like outdoor stuff, skiing, backpacking. You're not going to get that kind of altitude in Oregon. So those are great, great places. Of course, you have to budget time to take off of work to go do those things, but you don't have the beauty maybe everywhere that you would in Oregon, but you have really, really beautiful places in California as well. And the last but not least, it's easier to travel. Oregon may be sort of its own little pocket up there, but in California, it's easier to get up and down the entire state, and you have these international airports everywhere. In Oregon, unless you're in Portland or Salem, there's really not an international airport. You have to get on a plane to go to another airport to go to where you want to go. So if you want to, some Eugene Airport does go to Denver, it does go to LA, it does go to San Francisco, but only one airline will do that, or two airlines will do that. Very, very small airport. So if you want to go to Philadelphia, you're looking at you're not going to get a direct from Eugene. But in California, you can get directs, so it's easier to travel from California. I'm just going to touch on a few more points real quick. So what's better? The weather is going to be better in California, and in Oregon, the western part of the state is very, very mild winters. The winters are very nice, very mild, but it will rain like 8 to 9 months out of the year. It'll be cloudy for 8 to 9 months out of the year. So even though it's beautiful, unless you want to hike in the rain, you don't really get to enjoy it. Whereas in California, depending on where you are, you can live in a beautiful place in California. It's certainly not going to be as beautiful as maybe Oregon would be, but you can enjoy it year-round, or maybe not during the hot parts of the summer, but you can enjoy it like 6 to 8 months out of the year. Where in Oregon, if it's Saturday and you were planning on a hike, you also have to plan on it being rainy. Where in California, you can plan stuff ahead of time and know that you're going to have good weather. And that's I guess that's a downside to Oregon, is that like if you have weddings or events or anything outdoors, you have to plan for the rain. California, the weather is great, but it's just really expensive. And so if you can make it work in an affordable, beautiful place, if you can find a nice place that's really gorgeous in California that doesn't cost a whole lot, that you're golden. In Oregon, if you don't mind the rain so much or the cloudy weather, you're awesome. So what's better for you? From my experience, I love them both. I'm in California right now because I think that for me, the weather, you can't be beat. I can grow food year round here. It's so beautiful in Oregon, but for most of the year, you can't even enjoy it for me because I would plan to go outside and then it's raining, and I don't really want to hike in rain gear. And it gets so mushy and sloppy and muddy. You try and take your dog to the park, and you sink down 6 inches in the grass because all the flooding, and you have moss growing on your cars, and all the trees are rotten, and all the homes have mold in them because it's too wet. It's just too wet in a lot of places in Oregon. In California, it's too damn dry in most places, but you can pull water out of the ground. You can't make the sun shine from the sky. So, I think for me right now, I think California is the place that I will choose. I will continue to visit Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. I think they're beautiful places to go in the summer. I think if you're looking for a place to sort of escape to, take the family to, and you really want a beautiful place where you can travel and see a lot of different cool sights, Oregon is going to be the better opportunity. I would go to Oregon, unless there's some exceptions, but I would go to Oregon. It's great to visit, but in terms of living there, it just got to be too much. When you get used to California weather, you really wonder why you tolerated living anywhere else. But if cost of living and having a nice, safe, homey place to raise your family, Oregon might be better for you too. So I hope you guys find some value in this video.